Hi, and welcome to the Curator Salon podcast with me, your host, Geeta Joshi. Today I'm going to be talking to Michael Petry, who is a curator and director at the Museum of Contemporary Art, also known as MoCA, in Peckham, South London, and most recently the author of a new book called The Word is Art, published by Thames and Hudson in October 2018. Welcome, Michael.
All right, thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome.
We're sitting here in Peckham, and we were talking about how diverse the art scene is, and it is really quite amazing what's happening in Peckham. And there's such a demand for not just the visual arts, but the performing arts. And one of the interesting things for me is that the books that I do usually become touring exhibitions. Mm-hmm. And the Word is Art follows on from several other books I've done for Thames and Hudson. The last one was called Nature Mort, Contemporary Artists Reinvigorate the Still Life Tradition. And that was a very big international touring exhibition of about 85 works of art that went to 4 different museums across the EU. And it finished earlier this year at London's Guildhall. And we would right now be planning to do the tour of The Word is Art, except for Brexit, which is preventing all of the institutions that we have worked with abroad from committing to it, because of course they have no idea what our status is going to be on April the 1st next year. Many people won't know that when you bring an artwork into the EU, you have to pay 20% VAT on the insurance value of that. Now, what that means is even if it's a museum and you're not selling the work, it's like a bond. And in the last show, we had 2 Mark Quinns, and we had all sorts of really fantastic artwork, and the value was incredibly high. Now, if you imagine you're a museum, you don't have the cash flow to put 20% up of the insurance value of that sort of work. So all of those institutions are saying to us, if you have a hard Brexit, and you are not in the EU, and you are not in any kind of customs union, then what that means is we cannot bring that work over because we won't have the money. And what's worse, if we had started the tour and the work was over there, we would have real difficulty getting it back to London. Wow. Because we don't know what the arrangement will be in terms of what the UK is going to do in terms of tariffs against the EU. So all these institutions that we've been working with for 10 years have been unable to plan. And an exhibition on that scale does not happen in 6 days or 6 months. I mean, these are things that we're planning for years. And so it's not just MoCA London. I mean, about a month ago in the Evening Standard, the director of the V&A made, a similar case and said, we, the V&A, may have to close for 6 months. And it was, really shocking. And people were really kind of outraged that no one in government has listened or talked to those of us in the creative sector, as they call it. And I personally knew someone who worked for David Davis when he was the Brexit minister. And I said to them, I need to talk to you because I need to talk to the minister, and I need him to understand what they're doing and what they're suggesting. They don't seem to have even any notice of the arts. And the first reply from his assistant was, well, why should he? You don't mean anything. I mean, arts don't matter. And I know this is the attitude of so many in government, both Labour and Conservative, are very dismissive of the arts. And I said to him, what percentage of the economy is car manufacture in this country? And he knew it's about 2%. And I said, that's why, of course, you've had Mitsubishi and all these people come in. I said, do you know what the creative industry's GDP percentage is? And he said, no, what is it? I said, 6%. We are 3 times larger. And you don't even know that. And you're trying to organize this Brexit, and you're not even talking to us, and you're dismissive of me when I say I need to talk to you, and you're not talking to anyone in the creative industry, and that's really problematic because what you're proposing is going to hurt not just the visual arts, it's going to really mess up the performing arts, because if we go out in a hard Brexit, everyone will need a work permit, myself included. So when I go to curate a show, I'll need a work permit. Now, imagine you're an orchestra with 100 performers. Every single person in that orchestra will need a work permit. The orchestra doesn't get a work permit. Each individual member will have to get a work permit. The amount of admin, the cost, everything, it's just going to be crazy for orchestras to go and tour, or a ballet company, or a dance company. And so I said to him, do you understand? We are a huge part of this economy, and you are not thinking about us, and you won't even speak to us. So he was really moved by that. So he went to David Davis and said, you need to speak to these, if not him, someone, the V&A or whatever. And was told, oh, I don't want to hear any negatives, only bring me positives. And so he refused to meet me. And from what I understand, that he refused to meet any of the creative industries. Because there are no positives for us for Brexit. Bring me positives. There is no positive for us in Brexit of any color. So, from the point of view of this book, we would already be getting underway to start this exhibition tour, but we can't. So, people don't really understand that this is going to affect people all across the board in so many ways, whether it's your medication, whether it's food production or import. And, in the creative industry, I don't think a lot of people who are not working all the time in Europe, are aware. And at MoCA, we often have, Erasmus interns, and will we be able to do that again? I mean, because once we leave the EU, the Erasmus system, which allows students from anywhere in the EU to travel somewhere else, certainly I don't think English students will be able to go anywhere else, but we have no idea whether European students will be able to come to the UK. And it's not just in the arts. I mean, all the universities have been saying to the Brexit officials, do you understand, if we lose the Erasmus students, we are going to lose a massive amount of money, because it all comes with funds attached and all sorts of things. So, it's not just the arts, it's not just car manufacturers, it's not just, it's across the board. And I think it's really unbelievable that, just yesterday or today, I can't remember Jeremy Corbyn has come out and said, I'm backing Brexit again. At this very late date, and is saying, I will, if I get made PM, I will push for Brexit. And of course, it's really destructive to the young people. I mean, I'm not a young person, and I think about all these kids, and their futures are going to be really blighted, and as an artist, as a student, you're not going to be able to go, in the way that I was able, to just go across Europe and work and do things. And the number of people I know who live in Berlin, as artists, or, with Stockholm, anywhere, what are their opportunities? They're not going to have those opportunities. So I'm afraid that's a depressing start to our podcast, but it's a really a real thing that's affecting, this book and what we would normally do with the launch of something like this.
So what state are you at with this then? Are you just going to have to wait and see? Or?
Well, we're putting together the exhibition is curated, we've talked to the artists, and if we can have a show that travels, we will. But up until we know what's happening, none of the institutions in mainland Europe are able to consider what they can do, and therefore put into their schedule when we might have this exhibition. So it's really everything is delayed in a way that we found ourselves in this situation unexpectedly, as does everyone else.
That's incredible. So, I mean, I'm guessing that's also affecting how you might get your funding as well, not just with the museum when they pay to have the work there or on the insurance and things, but also if you're applying for funding, what you'd be able to do with it and what you can't.
Well, I mean, I think what's really important for people to understand is that the funding for the arts is probably going to all but disappear in this country once we have Brexit, because there will be, I mean, a massive crash, in living standards and everything from what I read. And we're already seeing it. The pound has fallen, just some, companies are already leaving, the UK. I mean, what we will be in a situation at is, people are going to say, pay for the NHS, which is good thing, and other kind of social systems. And I think the arts are not going to we're not going to have funding from the arts councils and things like that. I'm sorry to say, I think there's going to be very little amount of that. And everyone will have to rethink, what, their plans are.
Do you think that's also only if you were looking to do things internationally? I mean, how much do you think Brexit's going to affect how much they give to, or funding bodies are giving to UK-based people?
I think that pot is going to shrink. Mm. I mean, I think that pot will shrink immeasurably, because, when a politician stands up in the House and says, "Why are we giving 100 million to the arts when we don't have enough nurses, or you don't have enough police?" It's a stupid, argument, and you shouldn't be comparing apples and oranges. But that's the sort of thing that we've heard it before, and then we know, and I know that's going to happen. And as it tightens, the crunch tightens, it will be harder for the people like myself to say, well, look, according to the government's own figures, every pound the government spends on the arts, they get £10 back, because that money is seeding the tourist economy. Because what happens? Why do people come to Britain? To see a nurse? No. To see a policeman? No. They come to see the Tate Modern. They come to see the Serpentine. They come to see the theater or the opera. I mean, and when they are here, they then spend on hotels, and they spend in restaurants and all of that. And that's where it comes in. They spend £1, they get £10. So, if you actually say to that MP who stands up and says, why should every single pound go to the nurses? You say, because then you lose tenfold. But, a lot of people don't know these are government statistics. I'm not making them up. That's the amazing thing, is when you say this back to government, they say, yeah, that's true. That is absolutely true. And so, economically, it makes sense to give to the arts because it generates more money. But, politically, the optics of that, can be made to look bad.
Yeah, I think that's where the arts always get sort of seen as a luxury.
A luxury.
Yeah.
And, we're in Peckham, and we are very embedded in the neighborhood, and that. And we do a lot of outreach, and we have people come who would never have been to a gallery, and, they often ask us to help them find something for their kids, and we do, because they don't have the tools or have never been aware of how they might get their kids into a school where there's performance. Because, of course, now so many schools don't have arts and don't have performance. And, the working class kids, of course, they are talented, but they're being denied these opportunities. And I think it's going to get worse.
So do you think investment in the arts, even through the educational sector, is going to be shrinking?
Yes, because they're going to be forced. Government has already said it's the, I don't know what they call it, but science, math.
Oh, that's right.
And everything. So it's about gearing kids up to go into jobs. And not educate them. It's about training them to do things as opposed to educating them, and that's something that's been going on for probably 20 years. And during that time, the arts have fallen off all the sorts of different curriculum.
Which is interesting, like you say, they're training people for jobs, which is actually, I think, something that's been going on for decades. It's just evolved into different forms, going back to, gearing young people just for jobs, because it seems the climate more internationally at the moment is actually more entrepreneurial anyway, because most artists, most curators have like a freelance element to how we work, and things like the digital sort of sphere has really opened up more opportunities for us to be found, find opportunities ourselves, collaborate and all of that. And yet, education's just setting people up for jobs down a very handful of sectors. Yeah,
and I mean, I think the new technology is a great thing, and that, as you say, has enabled people to connect. And, we at MoCA, we don't have a permanent subsidy from the Arts Council or anything like that. We are very entrepreneurial. We have to find the funding for all our projects. And that's fine. I mean, we've never actually asked to be part of that system because it's a very fragile kind of system, unless you're Tate Modern, And so, I don't have any issue with being entrepreneurial. But I think if you train kids not to be entrepreneurial, you train them to do things, then you limit their horizon. And that's what education should be. It's about opening up your horizon so that you can do all those things, or you can see that opportunity when it's there. And if the only thing you see as an opportunity is, I've got to get a job, then, something much more fulfilling may come your way and you may not even see it. So, I mean, and, when, you're talking about the sort of international interactions on the web, I'm going to kind of turn the focus a little bit to the book. This is an incredibly international book. I mean, I think we have over 60 languages represented. We've got Arabic, we've got Cantonese, we've got Tibetan, we've got Korean, we have Thai, we have Spanish, we have Italian. We have artists from all around the world. And even within, say, the Arabic language, we've got an artist who's Tunisian, we have a Lebanese artist, we've got an Iraqi artist, we've got an Egyptian artist. So it's not that it's even just, all, they're all the same. All these people who are speaking Arabic, they're all the same. No, we really, I have really tried to represent different nationalities because everybody across the world is using text in art. And that comes very much from the web. And my idea for the book was that, probably about 5 years ago, there was a real concern that books were really going to go all digital. Everything was going to go ebooks, and people were worried about publishing in books and because of the internet. And then, of course, what happened is that everyone became a writer. Everyone also became a photographer taking selfies, but everybody also became a writer because you're making text all the time.
Yeah, it's so true.
And you're reading all the time. And the new words like LOL or whatever, you have to learn the language of this new system, or you have to learn emojis, but you're still reading, and you're writing. And so instead of language becoming less important, language has become unbelievably important. And that's why the book is really timely, because again, people are aware that language is so part of the visual arts. And there's a chapter in the book on new media. And so we've even got a couple of examples of artists who work creating GIFs, GIF, GIFs, not GIFs. And we've got a QR code in the book. And if you take your smartphone and you scan the QR code, up on your phone will come the artwork, which exists only as, truly as a GIF. So it's very, as a hard, old-fashioned thing, a book. It's even connecting you to the internet and
in real time,
as you read. If you want, you just take your smartphone and do it, and bang, you've got it. And funnily enough, this happened last night because I showed it to someone, and they were like, "Really? Let's see it." And they tried it, and they couldn't believe it. And I said, "Yeah, there you go. It works." So and the funny thing about new technology is new technology today is old technology tomorrow. So who knows how long the new technology element will be new? But it's really important for a book like this to show not only the works, like there's a chapter on installation, there's a chapter on sculpture, there's a chapter on painting. If you think of someone like Ed Ruscha, who's very famous for his paintings that include words, or that really are based in text. That's the kind of work that has lasted 50 years already. I think those gifts, who knows what's going to happen in 50 years? I doubt they will be on the internet. There'll be something else, but it'll be an interesting kind of situation for what happens to those new media things.
So when you first came up with the idea of the book, was it that you were just seeing, was it that sort of fear of publishing sort of going or dying away, or was it that you'd sort of seen a lot of text in art and you sort of felt that all needed to be brought together and then perhaps, not categorized, but, put the way into the chapters that you've chosen?
Well,
or was it the other way around, actually?
It's actually quite different from that, in the sense that in all the books that I've written, they come from my own practice as a visual artist. I'm first and foremost an artist. And in the 80s, I was making installation art. And for a long time, there was no name for it, even what we were doing. And then, it just sort of came within the way that other artists, we were all talking about it. But, it was like, well, I'm making an installation. And, in the late 80s, people would ask me, well, what is an installation? I would try to explain it, and my mother asked me, what's an installation? Oh. And I thought, I got to find a book for her because, I'm never going to be able to explain this properly to her. And there was no book. And so I went to Thames and Hudson and I called them and I asked to speak to one of the editors, Nico Stengos, who was one of their famous editors. And I said to him, do you know what installation art is? And he said, no. And I said, that's why you need me to write you a book. And he said, okay, come in. We have a meeting. And we had a meeting and I came out of there and he said, fine, here, write a book. Incredible. And so the very first book on installation art is mine in the world. And that's because Thames and Hudson were very forward thinking and they understood, oh, wow, we don't know what this is. If we don't know what it is, yeah, I bet a lot of other people don't. And, when the book came out, there was a lot of contention. Oh, that's not installation. And it started a real dialogue around it. And by the time we brought out a second volume, not a revised, but a completely new book that looked at it called Installation in the New Millennium, that was about 10 years in between. Mm-hmm. By that point, the world had caught up, and understood this is installation or that's installation. It is how it's different from sculpture. It stopped being the necessity. The book, you didn't need a book anymore to tell you,
right.
And the book that I did, two books back, which we did a very big tour for, was called The Art of Not Making.
Oh, yeah.
The new artist-artisan relationship. Uh-huh. And in that period, I went from making very temporary installations to very large-scale installations that often featured glass and very beautiful objects, very big. And so people were always asking me, how do you blow glass? And I said, I don't know. I don't do that. I design it and I'm there when they're blowing it and I oversee it, but I don't actually produce it. I don't blow the glass. And it occurred to me at that point, I thought, that's an interesting thing, and the more I started looking around, of course, if you look at a lot of the work by YBAs, it's all produced by Mike Smith and other fabricators. And I thought, well, and of course, this is a very historic way of making. That's what the book, that's the core of the book, is to say, well, actually, it seems like it's new, but it's actually very old. And so it came from people asking me about that.
And is that like going back to, let's say, Renaissance ateliers?
Absolutely, yes. Okay. And so the Nature Mort book, the last one, came about because I was making these works that I thought in a curious way, I thought these are like still lifes. And I thought, oh, it's so weird that I'm making this kind of old-fashioned work. It must be old-fashioned because this is still life. And I thought, I wonder if anyone else is kind of making still lifes. And of course, as soon as it came in my mind, I started looking and it was like, oh, actually, everyone is using it as a metaphor for death, which is what the traditional still life is. It's a metaphor for death. And it's like, this is how we in the 21st century can talk about death, which is not in a kitschy way, but in a sophisticated way, and actually say, well, actually, this is a tradition that goes very far back, all the way back to the Greeks, still life, which talks about mortality. And that's why so many people are using this metaphor, because it's something that, we've had continuous war for the last 20 years, and terrorism, and so I think a lot of people, well, most people are aware of the fragility of our lives. And, these idiots flying drones into Gatwick, they could have killed someone. They could have killed a whole plane load of people. I mean, I don't think that's what they were trying to do, but, the possibility was really there. And we are just more aware of how at risk we are. And as Londoners, we've seen terrorist attacks, and so people are aware. I mean, I think the great thing about Londoners is it's like, people said to me, oh, you can't get on the tube. It'll be dangerous, and I'm like, we're Londoners. We're on that tube tomorrow. We're not going to let that stop us. And people didn't. And so there's a kind of resilience, but there is a realization that death is something that was in the background. So, all the way coming back to the word is art, a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment is word-based, installations and things like that. And it occurred to me when I was making this, I thought, I've kind of shifted, and I bet other people have too. And I, started looking, and then of course it became very clear to me that everybody across the world is looking towards text.
Yeah.
And so that's where the book came out of.
Do you think that is, what is the thing that's made people really want to use text? Do you think it is social media? Do you think it is like a graffiti tradition? I mean, it's sort of born out of many things, like being, like even advertising and then making statements.
I think text is now everywhere.
Yeah.
And, if something's in your consciousness as an artist, I don't see how you cannot at least interact with it. I mean, that doesn't mean that someone like Sean Scully has to, he's an interesting painter, doesn't use text in any way. But I'm sure he's aware, of works that are textual. So I think it's just something that is in the air. And I'm sure he does use email, and, and maybe he doesn't do his own Facebook and Twitter and stuff, but, he will at least be directing what needs to go into that dialogue. I'm not a big Twitter fan, but again, that's a new way of speaking.
Yeah.
And it's very limiting in the sense that you can't put across nuanced ideas. It's absolutely black and white. You are an idiot. That's a Trump one, or I'm the greatest. That's a Trump one. You can only get this kind of soundbite thing, whereas I'm much more interested in poetry. I'm much more interested in long prose stories. Twitter just forces you into this very tiny kind of thing. And so, I don't think we're going to have a Twitter poet, we certainly have online poets. But I mean, maybe there is a possibility of being a Twitter poet. I don't know. I mean, and to be honest, I'm not that interested in it, because it is really a shouting match. At least that's what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't really use Twitter much anymore either. I think Instagram's my platform of choice, and I think for that it's a combination of the visual and the prose, because it's really important now that, anything that you write in what they call the caption, the text area, is quite intentional, that it is more engaged, or is as engaging as the image, to actually have any relevance to your audience.
And I certainly think in the visual arts, the Instagram is much more important.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what's going to happen over time, is that those people who want different things they will sort into different apps, because Instagram isn't really very good if you're a musician.
Right. Yeah.
Vine, which was this kind of 6-second kind of video. I mean, again, that's not. I mean, maybe you can hit a high note and go, I mean, that's probably it. It's just over and over. I mean, that's not. YouTube is very good for that because you can put up your video, and people can watch it. And so whereas in the arts, visual arts, not that many people use YouTube.
Yeah, that's true.
So I just think depending on what your interest is, you'll start using certain platforms and not others.
So going back to the book, it's got over 200 artists, and I think you've categorised under your chapters as those making social comment, and then actually a chapter around books themselves as the form of the artwork. So how did you deal with translation?
So one of the key tenets of the book is to talk about the difference between reading a text and reading an artwork. Mm-hmm. So when you look at a painting that has a word on it, you're doing two things. First of all, you're reading the language, which is one type of reading, but you're also reading the whole thing as an artwork, which is a very different kind of reading. So in this work, all the works in this book are dealing with that double sense of reading as a language and reading as an artwork. And what happens is your mind has to translate the visual part of it, reading an artwork, into a verbal language so that you can understand it. So there's already one translation going on. So what happens if the word on the painting is in another language than the one that you know? You have a third type of translation because you have to actually make a translation of that language text into a text that you can read. And then you have the translation of that into the artwork. So there's a painting by a French artist which says, Je t'aime, Mohammed. Okay, now if you read French, it means I love Mohammed. But if you don't read French, they're just words, or equally all of the work in Arabic, I don't know what it says because I don't read Arabic. So when I see it visually, I'm only reading it as an artwork because I cannot read the language. So I'm missing half of the information in that work unless I read the translation, which is provided in the book. But when you see the artwork in situ, you don't have that translation. But
the translation in, even like within a book or, it could be the gallery panel that explains an artwork that's in another language, you often lose the cultural context as well, don't you?
Absolutely. And that's what I'm talking about in the book is the reading, the translation. Every time you translate from one thing to another, you lose information. And so, maybe a painting, even a painting, has cultural text and cultural context. There's a work by Hilseed, and I'm even pronouncing his name wrong because I don't speak, Arabic, and so I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. He's made an installation in Cairo, okay, and it's Arabic across 50 different buildings, and it's huge. It's an incredible thing, and you need to actually be in the city on a certain hill to see it all together. And it's so spectacular, but it's also very culturally specific in that the area of the city where all the buildings are is the Christian quarter. And in Cairo, it's the Christians who collect all the trash for the whole city. And so they are considered unclean. Because the vast majority of the population are Muslim, and they won't do this particular job. Yes, that's it there. And so historically in Cairo, those citizens who are Cairenes, I mean, you know, they're native to Cairo. They've been born and raised there for hundreds of years, if not more. They are looked down upon as dirty. So what he wrote was a very old second or third century phrase that translates roughly to, if you want to see the sun, you must first remove the mote from your eye. So, you know, he is making a comment in Arabic about the fact that Christians are seen as lesser, and saying to the general population in Arabic, you know, look, these people take our rubbish away. That's a great thing, because otherwise our street, you know, the city's a mess. And so, you know, there's a huge cultural and specific location of where that is, but also in the kind of social context of how those people who take the rubbish away for the whole of the city are seen. So, you know, you need that information, which, you know, obviously I'm providing that in the book, but at the same time, I don't know. I mean, he has provided me with that translation. So I have to assume that it's as good as it's going to be. But at the same time, there's another one in the book by Michael Shawanase, who is a Thai artist. And the piece that it's a very large neon words. And the whole point of his piece is that in the Thai language, and of course they use different characters again, you know, there is no specific translation to this particular word, because it all depends on context and tonality, because it's a tonal language, just like Chinese, you know, Mandarin and Cantonese. You know, if you go ma, it means one thing. If you go ma, it means something else. It's the same two letters, M-A, but it's how the tone of your voice goes. And so for those of us in the West where we don't have a tonal language, that's incredibly difficult to learn. And so if you have a tonal language and you have a context for which the word is used, that it means something else, you know, his work, we had a really hard time even talking to him, you know, I mean, back and forth on email, to decide what the translation of this piece was, because it's meant to be ambiguous.
Right.
You see, and so when a Thai person reads it, it means something very different to them than us in the West, because we will never get that context for it. So, you know, that's what I'm trying to get across, is that language is incredibly beautiful, incredibly subtle, very poetic. And that's why Twitter doesn't really work for me, because you can't get across all of those possibilities in language.
Michael, thanks so much for spending time with me this morning and being on the podcast. It's been really interesting. It's great talking to you always. Where can people find you online?
They can find me online at michaelpetry.com, or they can find me at Mocha London, which is mocha.london. And we've got links to all our other social media there, so you can see what we're up to.
Amazing. Thank you. And if you're listening to this podcast before the 20th of January, then there's still time to see Volume by Remy Ruff installed at Mocha here in Peckham. Thanks so much.
Thank you.